All right, joining me now is Jackson Gatlin, who covers the Rockets for Locked On Rockets. Thank you so much, Jackson, for hopping on, man. I'm really excited to hear and listen to your coverage of the Rockets this year.
Excited to be here, man. This is such an amazing project that you put together, and I can't wait to kind of, navigate this season and see how this team ultimately progresses and grows, because I do think the Rockets are going to be one of the more fun storylines to follow this season, just kind of based on where the organization has been and where they're trying to go. This kind of being the transitional year, if you will, with, bringing in a new head coach, the veteran additions, all that I'm sure we're going to dive into in pretty extreme detail here in just a moment.
A nearly completely remade roster around some of the young guys. You've got some amazing additions in Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks. My guy Jeff Green from the Nuggets is over there. Jock Landale as well. And then some high draft picks. But tell me, what do you think is the most intriguing storyline about the Rockets at this point?
I would say I think it has to be revolved around Ime Udoka, right? And just kind of how he is implementing his image for this team, right? What the culture that he is trying to build, the structure that he's trying to implement, because you kind of already saw that with the Boston Celtics, right? He got 1 year, one crack at it, and things were not perfect right out of the gate for that Celtics team, right? They struggled, and then they started to turn things around the back half of that season where they were just absolutely incredible. And then they went on, this awesome finals run. Obviously, the whole situation happened with Ime. He was let go, ultimately had to, spend the entire year away from the NBA, and gets hired by the Rockets. And this is kind of it's not just like a redemption tour or a way for Ime to rehabilitate his image, because he probably wants to be able to, show, hey, Boston shouldn't have let me go. Obviously what happened, but he probably wants to still prove he's a top 5, top 3, whatever you want to call him, head coach in the entire association. And then you also have the Rockets, who they've basically been the NBA's tire fire for the last 3 years, right? They sought out to be the worst team in the NBA and acquired top draft picks. And in the macro lens, they achieved exactly what they wanted to do, right? They were a very bad team. They acquired a lot of top-end young talent. Go back to the initial draft, the first of the rebuilding year, where they walked away with Jalen Green and Alperun Sengun. The following year, Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason. And then most recently, this last NBA draft, Amen Thompson, and somehow Cam Whitmore falling out of the top 5, top 10, all the way to the Houston Rockets at pick 20. So a really star-studded kind of group of high upside, high potential individuals. They're kind of quote-unquote core 6, if you will. But I think this season is going to be all about what can Ime Udoka achieve with this Rockets team, because it's no longer, you still have to balance development with these young guys. You still have to figure out, how to get the best out of guys like Jalen, like Sengun, right? What roles do you deploy them in? All of that. But it's also about winning now. It's about this organization wanting to change the perception and get back to a place where they're playing some winning, meaningful basketball games. And that's why they went out and got the veteran additions of Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, Jeff Green, as you already pointed out, who I will say was a Rocket before he was a Nugget. So this is his second stint in Houston.
That's true.
Yeah, it's just going to be like seeing how Ime kind of navigates this is going to be probably the number one storyline of this entire season.
I'm looking forward to it. One of the major points that I had when I wanted to cover about this team is there's a distinct lack of professionalism and maturity throughout the last couple of years. And obviously Kevin Porter Jr., for a variety of reasons, has kind of played himself and put himself out of the mix. But adding a guy like Fred VanVleet as that replacement, adding a guy like Dillon Brooks to help on the wings and be a veteran defensive option there, there's reason to believe, and there's reason to believe in Ime Udoka as a guy who can get the most out of a young team that does have some veterans, but mostly a young team looking to take the next step. Is this team more professional and mature in your eyes? What have you seen from them over these last few days?
Ryan, it is a night and day difference from where this team is at now to where this team was at over these past couple years. It's really unfortunate because Steven Silas is hands down one of the nicest, kindest, most genuine human beings you will ever meet. But at the same time, I do not think he was equipped to handle this situation in Houston, right? I don't necessarily like the excuse of, okay, he was hired to coach a very different team. He was hired to coach James Harden, Russell Westbrook. Sure, I get that. And Steven Silas is probably the exact type of coach that you would want to kind of massage the ego of a couple star players and kind of, more or less stay out of their way and just kind of empower them to do what they do really well. He wasn't the type of coach that you need to be this heavy-handed, disciplinarian for a group of 19, 20, 21-year-olds who don't even know who they are as NBA players, let alone human beings yet, right? Steven Silas was he had this like substitute teacher, kind of youth pastor energy a little bit around the Rockets for the better part of these last 2 or 3 years. And it's really unfortunate because I do think there's a place for him in the NBA. I hope that he gets another crack at a head coach, a coaching position somewhere else down the line. But Ime is clearly what this team lacked. They had no definitive leader. Sometimes that leader can be a player, right? Sometimes that leader can be a talented player who is just so amazing. Like they step into that role and they're clearly the de facto leader of a basketball team. They didn't have that, right? Because Jalen Green did not step in and he's still got this insane potential, but he's not very clearly the best player on a team yet. Alperun Sengun, all the talent in the world, but wasn't really empowered to be the best player on the team by the previous coaching staff. Now you probably make the argument that the best all-around player right now at this very moment is Fred VanVleet, former All-Star on the team. But is he the leader of the team? He's going to take a leadership role. The leader of this Houston Rockets team now is Ime Udoka. He is basically the face of the franchise now. Everything is Ime. The structure is all Ime. And a nice little wrinkle, and it might not seem like a big thing in the grand scheme of things, but you look at the Rockets did their open practice, right? Bring all the fans to Toyota Center and have a good time. And last year's open practice, they basically rolled the ball out there and we saw 10 minutes of scrimmage time. It was basically like the, all-star game where guys are kind of jogging up and down the court, throwing lobs. And it's fun for all of about 2 minutes watching, tall guys jump high and dunk hard, right? This year, we actually saw structure at open practice. Ime was running legitimate NBA drills at open practice, giving us an actual peek behind the curtain as to what they actually do in practice. Some of the drills that they like to run where you put 2 minutes on the clock and you have to score 60, make 60 buckets in 2 minutes. Doing some shooting drills, kind of walking the fans through some of the paces that they actually go through every day in practice. And that's like just this small little like microcosm of what Ime brings to the table from a structure and accountability standpoint. And you see that in talking to the players and talking to him and talking to people around the organization. Everything is so different this time around. And it really does feel like now that you have some adults in the room with Ime, with Fred, with Dillon, with Jeff, with Jock Landale, also Reggie Bullock added to this cast of veterans, that's going to go an incredibly long way in helping these young guys grow up a little bit faster because they really haven't been met with many expectations over the last 2 years.
I love it. That's exactly what you want to hear. If you're a fan of the team, if you are an analyst, somebody who is looking for this team to kind of just take steps in the right direction. And it does feel like that they're trending in a great place. And you saw some flashes, obviously, from guys over these last couple of years. Jalen Green, Alperun Sengun, notably. Jabari Smith had a fantastic summer league and deserves a lot of credit. And then you draft a couple of young guys in Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore, who should be a very talented, interesting prospect as well. Which of these guys are going to be the cornerstones? Does it matter? Does it matter at all at this stage? Or just waiting to see who kind of emerges naturally? Or is there kind of a pecking order to this thing?
I think when you look at this year specifically, it's going to be a very big year to kind of find out, right? As year threes go for NBA players, that's kind of when you start to really find out who a player is as an NBA player. And they start to kind of cement their identity. Are they able to achieve some of their, top end potential? So this is going to be a really big year for Jalen Green and Alperun Sengun, both entering their third year. The Rockets drafted them back in 2021, and they were kind of they took the biggest swings possible with those guys, right? Because Jalen Green's top end potential, right, is he's that mold of like the superstar 2-guard bucket getter, 30 plus points a night, ideally good efficiency, that kind of thing. Alperun Sengun, Turkish League MVP at 18, could run an offense through him. He's exactly the type of guy that you see in that, Jokic, Sabonis mold of he could roll out of bed and get you 20, 12, and 5 on any given night if you really lean into his offensive skill set. So I think they've got a lot of bites at the apple, if you will, right, with all 6 of these guys. Even Tari Eason, who's been almost kind of pigeonholed into this idea of like, oh, he's like the perfect 3-and-D role player. Like even he might have some upside potential to his game that hasn't really been tapped into quite just yet. He's talked about the other day wanting to be the best defender in the NBA one day in his career. And he's got all the physical gifts and the kind of innate defensive basketball IQ to achieve that goal at one point, at some point down the line. So maybe you see that. But for me, I think it's going to be a really pivotal year for Jalen Green and Alperun Sengun to kind of figure out who they are as NBA players, what their ceilings really are. And there's no longer any excuses for either of those guys, right? The last couple of years, you could make the excuses. There weren't expectations. The defense across the board was bad, so those guys could get away with being bad defensively. Offensively, there was a lot of selfish play at times. Your turn, my turn, all that. All of that is out the window now. Ime Udoka demands accountability. He demands respect. He wants all these guys to play an unselfish style of basketball. He wants them to have a defense-first mentality, saying and doing all the right things. And it's never really been about like buy-in, I guess, because there's never been a lack of effort from Jalen or Sengun as far as just the amount of work that they do put in. There's moments where, they take plays off defensively or it's lazy to get back in transition.
Sure.
It's bound to happen with a team that's going to lose 50 to 60 plus games every year, right? So they've got pretty big years ahead of them. No excuses for either of them. We're really going to find out who they are as players. But kind of my bold prediction going into this year is that by the end of the season, I think Jabari Smith Jr. will be the best overall player on the Houston Rockets when you take into account his offensive and defensive contributions.
That is a big, bold prediction right there. Just kind of going from where he was in his rookie season to where you expect him to be. And there's a lot of talent on this group. There's a lot of quality players on this team now. And if Jabari Smith were to emerge, that would shift things significantly, I would say, about just what you're hoping for the vision of this team to be going forward.
Absolutely. And I did a show of mine over at Locked on Rockets in the past where we kind of ranked the importance of the 6 core prospects for the Rockets. And I do think when you look top to bottom at this roster, for me, the 2 most important pieces of this Rockets rebuild, as far as those 6 prospects go, are definitely Jabari Smith Jr. and Amen Thompson. You can make arguments for one over the other, but I think when you look at those 2 guys, their two-way potential, what they bring to the table, their unique skill sets, their insane blend of physicals, of size, of athleticism, all of that, those are the 2 prospects that if you had to tell me, Jackson, which 2, if you could guarantee that they hit their ceiling, which 2 are you going to, pick? And I'd probably pick Amen Thompson and Jabari Smith Jr. So at this point, Jalen Green is kind of the de facto, almost like face of the franchise because he was the first piece of the Rockets rebuild, the number 2 overall pick, the first guy drafted into the new era of Houston Rockets basketball. But at the same time, they haven't really anointed him like as the permanent face of the franchise, right? So at any point, Jabari could eclipse him, or Amen Thompson could come out and hit the ground running in a big way this season, where we look at him halfway through the year and we're like, oh, he's the Rockets' best player soon. Like he'll be the face of the franchise, down the line or next offseason. Like they'll kind of shift the marketing campaign. Right now, it's very much a collaborative sense of all 6 of these young guys are on the same playing field. Clearly, some guys will get more shots, more reps than others, but none of them, I think, are being put on a pedestal above the others because, again, Ime wants to prioritize a team-first mentality, a team-first environment, and a very unselfish environment, which is a far cry from what they have been the past 2 years.
I love what you're selling. This all sounds fantastic, and I look forward to seeing how it plays out because I can see 27 different combinations of things that happen with this group. And hey, one guy hits, one guy doesn't, 2 guys hit, 4 guys don't. Or you could say 4 of these guys all look like they're going to be these future cornerstone type pieces. And we just don't know right now. But watching this play out in real time is going to be really, really fascinating. Amen Thompson, I love the vision that you have for him. Amazing athlete, but also amazing basketball IQ and head on his shoulders. And so that should be very, very interesting to see. All right. So with all that said, give me a win prediction for this year. Last year, team won 22 games. I have them at 32 right now is the win prediction because it's just hard to see or hard to actually predict more than that within the West landscape as it is right now. But where do you see this team finishing?
Yeah, well, first I will say my vision for Amen Thompson is only seconded by his vision because his court vision is absolutely insane. Like some of the passes that he throws are out of this world. Like he's got this really fancy, like over the top kind of like hook pass where he just, rifles the ball across the court without even looking. He loves throwing no look passes. He's got this insane athleticism, right? Where you are often taught, do not jump without a plan of what you're going to do with the basketball, whether it's shoot, pass, whatever. He can jump and not know what he's going to do with it yet because he's just gliding through the air and he's got all this time in the world to figure out what he's going to do with the ball, looking off defenders mid-air before he dishes up, a delicious dime to one of his teammates. So he's going to be one of the most electrifying players to watch in the NBA this year. As far as win totals go, The last I checked, I believe the FanDuel win, over under win total was like 31.5 for the Rockets.
Okay.
I think I'm smashing the over on that win total guaranteed. Now, how
Ooh.
much of the over? That's where I'm kind of aligned with you, where it's like the West is going to be a bloodbath. You've got 13 of the 15 teams in the West that ideally would like to be competitive and probably gunning for one of those play-in spots or just a straight up playoff spot. The two teams likely being the San Antonio Spurs and Portland Trailblazers that don't really care if they make the play-in. I'm going to say somewhere safely in that 33 to 37 range is kind of, and I hate to give you a range, but that's going to be my range. So if you want one solid number, I'll say 35 wins.
It's completely fair, and I mean, it generally goes like, hey, if you're covering the team, you probably have 2 more wins than what I have. That's been my experience while recording these previews. So it's a completely fair number, and I think that there is a clearly a sense of optimism here that. It's nice to hear that after what has happened over the course of these last couple of seasons, that it would just be a breath of fresh air to kind of get back on track and play some competent basketball again. So I'm really looking forward to it. What does success look like for you and for the Rockets this season?
It's tough because you don't want to immediately go from being so heavily prioritizing development to suddenly, oh, well, we have to win X number of games where the season is a disappointment. I still don't think you measure success for this season in wins and losses, but I just think that it's almost, and we were talking about this before we hit record, it's almost impossible for this team not to take significant steps forward this year because you've completely upgraded the coaching staff. You've added an immense amount of, veteran talent to this squad. And then the final variable, and this is the one that is the most hard to pinpoint because it's the one that you really can't pinpoint, is the internal growth of the young guys, right? How big of a step forward does Jalen Green take? How big of a step does Alperun Sengun take, right? Does Jabari become potentially the best overall player on the team? If 2 or 3 of the young guys take those significant steps forward here in years 2 and 3 for all of them, or if Amen Thompson is just, an electrifying impact rookie right out of the gate, then I think it's, almost impossible for this team not to hit 35 wins and again get back to a level where they're playing meaningful basketball games again. I do still think you have to look at the collective year because this has to be viewed as kind of a transitional year for Ime Udoka, right? There's probably going to be some growing pains along the way. It's not going to be perfect right out of the gate. If it is, then awesome. But I think that this is going to be his year where he's kind of dipping his toes in the water, right? He saw the talent and the vision for this Houston Rockets team from afar. They brought him in. They've given him a lot of control over the organization right away, right? He didn't want to bring James Harden back because he didn't think the fit was correct for the culture, for the identity that he wanted to establish here in Houston. So instead of James Harden, which we knew that there were a lot of rumors about the Rockets and a potential James Harden reunion, instead, they hire Ime Udoka, and he says, no, I have a very clearly defined vision for this group of guys. And in order to achieve that vision, I need Fred VanVleet to make it work. So I'm drinking the Ime Kool-Aid. A lot of Rockets fans are. I really think everybody should, though, because I think he's a top 5 coach in the NBA, and I think he's about to do a complete 180 with this Houston Rockets organization.
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun to track throughout the year. He is Jackson Gatlin covering the Houston Rockets for Locked On Rockets. Jackson, thank you so much for helping me out this year. This is going to be a very fun season.